Welcome to a totally legit guide for Inaros, the mummy.
Wasn't Kovar the mummy?
No, he's the mummy, like Egyptian mummy, with the bandages and shit.
He doesn't look at all like a mummy.
I don't know. Man, I don't fucking read the lore. Do I look like a nerd?
Now that you say that, didn't you dress up in the previous video and...
Moving on. So in order to prepare for this video, I've started learning more about Egyptian culture and their deities, and I came to a conclusion. Shit's fucking weird. Just like Inaros. Inaros is a tank, which means that he can take a lot of damage and also deal a lot of damage, and also be very mobile, and...
Is there a downside to this?
This is Warframe. The only downside to being a tank is... Inaros is actually one of the most chill Warframes in the game. The guy gives literally zero fucks about anything because he literally doesn't have to. All you need to do as Inaros is just exist in something's general vicinity and you'll start killing them slowly and painfully just by being alive. But Moon, what if I die? Well, that's the fucking point. You can't die. Ever. How the fuck are you gonna die with this guy? He has like 7,000 health all the time. Before we go into Inaros' abilities, we first need to talk about his base stats. More specifically, the fact that he has no shields, but instead a base of 2,200 health at max rank, which can actually reach pretty ridiculous amounts with mods and subsumed abilities, although it can be a bit overkill. The fact that Inaros is innately like this is important because it affects his builds and the way you play him. So apparently the Sky is just a woman that's like very good at stretching. Inaros actually has two passive. The first makes Inaros heal whenever he kills something with a finisher. This synergizes with his kit, which we will get onto later, and it allows him to restore the little HP damage that he loses since he always takes HP damage. His other passive is Undying. If you miraculously manage to die as Inaros, how do you do that? You have so much armor and HP and like, how? Dude, like seriously, what the fuck? You enter your regular bleed out stance even if you're in solo, but Inaros then entombs himself. While in this state, Inaros can use his regular fire button to release a beam that inflicts 75 true damage per tick to an enemy or ally, and it drains their life force to fill up his meter. If we manage to fill up the meter, Inaros revives himself. Allies can just regularly revive you while in this state, but how about we don't get to this state in the first place, huh? To me, what's stupid about this passive is that it's really hard to get the revive, especially in higher levels. It also stops on Inaros' last scraps, which is like 10 times fucking better because it's actually possible to revive with it, especially if you have a good amp and arcanes. This passive is not affected by any mod, so you can't make it easier. Please, for the love of Ra, just let me use last scraps instead of this shit. It's so unreliable. You know, the more I read about this stuff, the more I realized that maybe natural selection wasn't really doing its job. So for the sake of me being a lazy prick and because context is something that's necessary here, we will talk about his second ability first. So Inaros' 2 is Devour. Inaros sinks a targeted enemy within 50 meters into quicksand for 30 seconds, trapping them in place and making them unable to do anything. While trapped, enemies can be devoured by Inaros or his allies if you press X on the target. While devouring an enemy like some kind of horror movie bullshit, the player is invulnerable to everything and they restore 400 HP per second while also inflicting true damage per second. The target receives 250 damage per second, which then ramps up to 500 per second over 2 seconds, in that second, in all the seconds. What the fuck does this even mean? Basically, you hit the guy slowly and painfully at first and then a bit less slow after a bit. If Inaros kills the devoured enemy, it will rise as a sand shadow, which is a copy of the enemy that will fight for you. The ability is affected by all mods and costs 50 energy. So the reason that I wanted to talk about this ability first is that this ability is actually just kind of meh. But Moon, it has really good heal and damage and it creates...
I will send you to Jesus.
The problem with this ability is that it takes way too long for him to deal the damage that he needs to deal in order to get the shadow. He doesn't need the heals and he already has a few ways to heal, so there is no benefit to stopping everything that he does in order to just use this. This game is about fast-paced gameplay, not standing in one spot and dealing damage while not moving. Well, I mean, fuck. Well, he does it slow as shit. Like this fucking slow. This footage is sped up because it took me like 2 minutes to kill this guy. Man, what the fuck? fuck? His one is Desiccation. Inaros throws out
Pocket sand.
in front of him that staggers all enemies up to 15 meters away in a cone. It deals an initial 150 true damage and then 9 true damage per second for 8 seconds. 25% of the damage dealt by the dot is restored as HP to Inaros. If enemies are facing Inaros, they are also blinded and open to finishers. This ability is affected by all mods and costs 25 energy. This ability is your main tool and why Devour is so useless. I mean, it would still be useless even if you didn't have this ability, so. The damage is meh, but it's fine, you're a tank. Your job isn't to deal damage, but to use it to help your melee weapon. The heal is fucking amazing, especially if you're against a large group of enemies, since it just constantly heals you and it's super spammable, so when you get to a next group you just send them 2 and the cycle continues. Even if you can't heal a lot from it, it still has a blind on it, so you can do a finisher and get your passive heal, which is also another reason to not use Devour. Like honestly, this ability just does everything better and faster. Speaking of which, this ability has an augment that makes Devour just a waste of space. Desiccation's curse causes enemies that are killed while blinded to have a 100% chance to become a shadow and deal double damage. What have I done? Why the fuck does Devour even exist? Just subsume that shit out, like seriously. It's the same ability but just worse in every possible way. The third ability is... Oh my god, this song is so old. Inaros spins and sweeps across a storm of sand. He then pulls in and lifts all enemies in a 7 meters radius and deals 500 slash damage a second. Lifted enemies are ragdolled and follow Inaros as he moves, but Inaros can't do anything besides moving. Inaros also has damage reduction during this ability. The ability is affected by strength and ranged mod and costs 75 energy and drains 10 energy per second, but the drain is affected by duration. The ability also grants a heal to Inaros if a target inside the storm is affected by Devour, and it will turn them into a shadow if they die, but honestly, I don't think that you deal enough damage in order to kill someone with it. Honestly, this is kinda meh. I know that these are already 2 abilities that you don't need to use, but in reality, Inaros doesn't need any abilities. This guy has so much HP and armor, you think he cares? He just chills and you basically survive and use whatever weapons you want to use. Well, that's interesting. Inaros' 4 is Scarab Swarm. Inaros starts to charge, sacrificing his health to gain Scarab armor that decreases his armor by 100%. Inaros will be in charging mode as long as you hold the ability, even after going past 100%, but it won't have any effect. Inaros can only sacrifice 2900 HP. It lasts until you either die, or if it gets disabled by nullifiers. If it's charged to at least 25%, Inaros can then target an enemy and tap the ability to consume 25% of the armor in order to launch a swarm of scarabs up to 30 meters away. This costs 25 energy. The scarabs infest all enemies in their path. Enemies infested start to flail and receive 200 corrosive damage per second for 15 seconds. Each swarm host creates a 15 meters radius aura that converts damage dealt to HP for you and your allies. The swarm spreads in a 5 meter radius for the entire duration of the ability. The ability is affected by all mods. Man, it's like everything this guy does fucking heals him. Not to mention any arcanes on Inaros or operator arcanes. So you get tankier, you get a heal in case you need it, which you usually don't, and you get bonus damage and armor strip from the corrosive damage. This is the ability that makes Inaros such a massive tank, since the bonus armor basically makes you immortal, and with all the heals your HP will always go up as long as you hit something. And we also have adaptation, which gives us 90% damage reduction and the amount of CC that you have. On top of that, there is the augment for this ability, Desiccation Swarm, which protects Inaros from any status effects, but it consumes 3% of the armor for each effect resisted. This is really good since you don't have to use Prime Sure-Footed, which lowers mod cost. It really helps with things like Profit Taker or the Exploiter Orb if you choose to use him there. More for the Exploiter Orb, since Inaros does not have weapon damage amp for Profit Taker. The cost is honestly minuscule considering that you can just recharge it, and you don't usually swarm enemies unless you really need to heal, which also rarely happens because, like I said before, Inaros doesn't give a fuck he just chills. Now let's get onto the build. Honestly, put whatever you want on there. It doesn't fucking matter as long as you have armor and enough health. Seriously, Inaros doesn't care what you do or what you build. So instead of giving you some kind of build, I'll just tell you what I like to do, since it doesn't matter what you do. It will work. It really only depends on what your playstyle is. Like seriously, while prepping for this video, I leveled him solo in Steel Path from like rank 0 when I put Forma on him. This guy's fucking busted. Let's start with this. This build is for dealing a lot of damage to crowds. So I subsumed Breach Surge here and added the 1 augment for the extra soldiers. I used Tenet Envoy to proc Breach Surge and this dagger from the Zerman because I like it. Like, use whatever weapons you want, honestly, it doesn't matter. This build is kind of similar to the other one, but it has Fire Blast on it for armor reduction for the super tough enemies. This build is for boss fights because you just want to survive, which just so happens to be Inaros' biggest strength, and use your weapons while giving no fucks. You can stick Roar here if you want to for bonus damage to weapons. I chose Elemental Ward that you don't have to deal with dodging stuff. All these builds use the same arcanes, but you can swap things around if you want. Arcane Grace is an obvious choice since we always take HP damage. Even if you only have the lowest version of it, it's still worth it. Inaros is honestly just a solid tank. He can be used for literally the entire game. He gives 0 fucks about sorties, arbitrations, or even the Steel Path. He can do anything. Mod him however you want to and have fun using whatever weapons you want. His only issues are his 2 and 3 that you don't really use, but you can just subsume those out. What I would recommend, however, if you have it, use the mini Siren Cat thing, I don't know what the name is, from Deimos, since it helps with overall damage, because Inaros has almost no damage in his kit. All he cares about is chilling, like on a bitch, maybe.